Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us for a special session of the Online Communist Forum. We're discussing the Israel's attack on Iran, which has now become a full-blown military conflict. We want to look at what's behind it, how is it going to play out, likely to play out, and also the political big picture behind it, which is not something you usually see in the media. We're very pleased to have with us two speakers. Moshe Machova, the co-founder of Matzpen, Israeli Marxist and expert on the Middle East, same as Yasmin Martha, who's an editor of Critique and a contributor to The Weekly Worker. Moshe is going to speak first, then Yasmin, and then as always, we're opening up for contributions from the floor. We're also asking comrades to attend the next demonstration called by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, amongst others, which will be quite big, I suspect, because of this attack. It's on the June 21st, pro-Palestine, anti-war in the Middle East, and we're looking for comrades to help us hand out the Weekly Worker, etc. So thanks for joining us. Over to you, Moshe.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's not a happy occasion, uh, but anything but surprising. It is the least surprising uh, event that I can think of. It's been long predicted. In fact, the first time I predicted, I explained why Israel is and specifically under the Netanyahu government is keen to attack Iran was in February 2012 in an article in the Weekly Worker titled Netanyahu's War Wish. And since then, it has been a sort of leitmotif in Netanyahu's express exhortation to allow the United States, to allow Israel to attack Iran. What has changed, why it has taken so long is because previous US administrations were wary of allowing Israel to start a war that may end up in a larger conflict that may involve the United States itself. And they had a bitter experience of previous conflicts in which they got entangled and which ended not too happily for the United States itself, although much less happily for the people attacked in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and so forth. But Trump is less inhibited, let us say, as we can see, although he had the reputation of being a peace-loving politician, that is to say, preferring economic pressures to warlike pressures, to warlike involvement. He is also much less predictable in this respect. And there is no doubt that Trump personally was involved in actually giving the green light to Netanyahu to launch this unsurprising attack. I want to explain the background to this because this is not a coincidental act on Israel's part. I want to explain the motivation behind it, the reasoning behind this kind of behavior on part of Israel. It is really a consequence, an offshoot of Israel's overriding strategic aim. What is the overriding strategic aim of the State of Israel? It is to complete the Zionist project of colonization of the land of Israel. The land of Israel, of course, is at the very least includes the area between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, but it goes. In fact, it's an ill-defined part of the world that can go far beyond this and is ultimately rooted in the divine promise of the Jehovah to Abraham in the book of Genesis. Now, completing the Zionist project of colonization implies or entails, necessitates two things: territorial expansion, that is to say, to get hold of the whole promised land, and ethnic cleansing. Because the whole of this territory that Israel wants to get hold of, the Zionist project aims at, is supposed to become a Jewish nation state, which means that a stable majority of Jews should inhabit it, and the Palestinian inhabitants or non-Jewish inhabitants of this area are surplus to requirement, and they should be got rid of somehow or other. Another consequence, another precondition for completing the Zionist project is securing regional hegemony. Israel must become a regional superpower, a nuclear monopolist, and it entitles continual war in order to secure this position. By saying that Israel must be aims at securing nuclear monopoly, I mean that Israel must not only be the only possession of nuclear weapons, but also the only state in the region that has a potential, a possibility of constructing nuclear weapons. That is to say, Israel aims at becoming a monopolist of not only nuclear weapons, but nuclear capability, which is not the same thing at all, because there are several states in the world that have nuclear capability, but are, for one reason or another, not actually possessing nuclear weapons. Now, these two aims, that is to say, territorial expansion and ethnic cleansing, and securing regional hegemony, are interconnected. One follows from the other. And I want to briefly survey the ways that they are connected and the way one entails the other. Why the completion of the Zionist project requires Israel to be a local hegemon. On the most elementary level is the following. That's number one: colonization provokes opposition by other states, opposition to the expansion of the state of Israel. Since colonization and completion of the Zionist project entails territorial expansion, it provokes opposition by the neighboring states at whose expense Israel is expanding, or who regard Israel's expansion as a potential danger to themselves. It also provokes opposition and solidarity by the people in the surrounding region. That is to say, mostly the Arabs of the Arab East, who are motivated by solidarity with the Palestinian people and who therefore uh, uh, are pushing their own governments despite themselves to uh, show some opposition to Israeli expansion. So on this very elementary level, Israel needs to be militarily superior to the surrounding states in the region. On a more profound historical level, the Zionist project has always been in need of imperialist sponsorship. It did not have a natural mother country, and therefore it needed a surrogate mother country. And you can compare this to a local mafioso who needs to sell himself to a global mafia boss as the best choice for regional deputy. That is to say, Israel needs the protection of the dominant hegemonic imperialist state, currently the United States, as granting it the position of sheriff or deputy in the Middle East region. There is a mutual interest, therefore, in promoting Israel as a powerful local ally and enforcer. That is to say, Israel has a value for the world hegemon, American imperialism, in as much as it is a powerful state. That is to say, the United States is interested in relying for its enforcement in the region on a local powerful state. So Israel has an inbuilt need to show itself as the most powerful and most ruthless, I would emphasize not only powerful but ruthless actor in the region. This is a mutual interest of both the global mafia boss and Israel as its local sheriff or deputy. They are both interested in Israel being seen as a ruthless, aggressive, and powerful enforcer in the region. Israel is interested in it because this is a selling point for itself as the local deputy. And of course, the United States is interested in using Israel as its deputy in as much as it is a powerful and ruthless local actor. And finally, as I pointed out in the article that I referred to earlier, dating from 2012, local aggression wars on the part of Israel are an excellent opportunity for expansion and ethnic cleansing. If the strategic aim of Israel is completion of the Zionist project of colonization, then local wars sparked by Israel or provoked by Israel are an excellent opportunity to be able to perpetrate ethnic cleansing. If you want to an illustration of this, I'll give you two quotes from today's papers. First of all, from today's Guardian, headline in today's Guardian. Quote, strikes on Iran ease pressure on Israel to end starvation in Gaza. What does it mean? It means that until this provocation by Israel, until this attack by Israel, there was an increasing acceptance by Western countries of the pressure from below, from on the part of of civil society to do something about the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, about the genocide. Belatedly, too little and too late, but still there was a mounting amount of pressure on the part of countries, including the United Kingdom, but France, even Germany, starting to apply a mild amount of pressure on Israel to stop the genocide in Gaza. But now that Israel has attacked Iran on behalf of the united Western imperialist community, so-called, the pressure has been eased. So the Guardian sums it up, as I quoted it, strikes on Iran ease pressure on Israel to end starvation in Gaza. That is an illustration how a regional war that is, in this case, provoked quite openly, initiated, provoked by Israel, helps in the other aim of the Zionist project of ethnic cleansing. And in today's Haaretz, I quote a headline, Gaza residents say IDF escalated attacks in Strip since Israel launched war on Iran. Okay, well, that amounts to the same thing. Since Israel has started the war, this doesn't mean that pressure has been removed from Gaza and is now Israel is concentrating on its war with Iran. Not at all. Actually, quite the contrary. The war on Iran has given Israel an opportunity since its act is in against Iran is actually condoned by all these Western imperialist countries or the members of the Western imperialist superstructure. The pressure on Israel has been eased, and it enables it to perpetrate ethnic cleansing in the Gaza Strip and no doubt very soon in the West Bank without incurring diplomatic pressure on the part of the Western countries. So there you have it. I think that's all I have to say as an opener. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Moshe. Next is Yasmin.
Okay, I've managed. Thanks very much, Moshe. I want to start by talking about something that I heard on Friday, believe it or not, on Radio 4. There's the distinction between preventive war and preemptive war. Now, those of us who have debated ad infinitum Iran-Iraq war have always said have always argued, some of us have argued, that maybe Saddam's attack on Iran was preemptive. He knew Iran was going to attack, or Iran had organized the Shias, who later America put to power, by the way. And that's why he attacked Iran. I'm not fully in favor of that view, but that's a possibility. And then we have, so preemptive war is apparently acceptable or can be legitimate. Preventive war is not. And preventive war is when you claim that in the future, at an undetermined time, a country might attack us. And in this case, you're arguing that a country will have a nuclear bomb and will attack us, which is basically Israel's argument, as far as I can see. And it's amazing. The entire press and media have accepted this. When you're being interviewed, you have to explain, well, where exactly is this atomic bomb? How did they prevent an atomic attack on Israel? Let's go to the IAEA meeting of last week, which apparently, or according to Netanyahu, is the reason why this attack took place now. I mean, there are many reasons, and I think Moshe explained the historic reasons and the current reasons for this much better than I could. But let's stick to what the IAEA meeting, which is now used as an excuse, did really actually say. Iran has something like 400 kilograms of U-235, uranium-235. This is the kind of uranium that can be used in an atomic bomb at 60% enrichment. For uranium to be able to be used for a nuclear weapon, you have to have 90% enrichment. This was put forward as non-compliance with NPT. European countries signed up to it. Israel took it as a reason. There was another very bizarre event around this IAEA meeting. The International Atomic Energy Authority claimed that their secret documents had been stolen by Iran. Now, I'm not quite sure how that could have happened, but all we know is that Iran hacked an Israeli nuclear document dump. And as many people have pointed out, was the IAEA saving its nuclear documents in Israel? Is that what it's saying? Anyway, this is where we are. The attack has taken many levels, as you know. I think it's very well programmed. It's been very well rehearsed. The IDF attacked Iran's revolutionary leaders. That was stage one. The nuclear installations were attacked next, and the latest stage is attacking oil and petroleum reserves. So it's got a plan. The Iranian government claims now that this was a victory. I think, I mean, even by the standards of Iranian propaganda, this is too much. They clearly were taken by surprise. The reason I say this is that there is reliable information that the reformist factions of the regime who were leading these negotiations in Oman were under the impression that a deal with the US was possible, maybe not imminent, but possible. And some of them had told people around them that this Sunday, today's meeting in Oman would lead to final victory. Obviously, that was total nonsense. The question remains as to how far did the US support this? Clearly, the US gave the green light. Trump admitted it. On Friday, I heard this tweet, I read this tweet on Truth, apparently, that was reported elsewhere, that Trump said Israel is likely to attend in the near future, but I still think we should carry on with negotiations. Now, the question is, did Trump realize the extent of the attack? Probably he did. There are those who argue that he was still under the impressions that a limited attack will give the US and Witkoff an upper hand in the negotiations in Oman. In other words, he's been saying this on a number of occasions that Iran is a very difficult negotiator, but we are making progress. So maybe there is an element of truth in that. I really don't want to go too far into such speculation. We don't know. The nuclear plants, the attack on the nuclear plants has implications. Al-Baradei, who, if you remember, was the head of IAEA, is stating quite clearly that attacking a nuclear installation is irresponsible because of all the worries. And members of my family on a regular basis in the last 3 days have asked me, are we prone to be poisoned by nuclear radiation? The answer is probably not at this stage. The reason is very clear. The bases, Fordow, Natanz, Hondar have been damaged, but the damage is on surface level or at lower level. Most of the actual nuclear enrichment is happening in these plants 3 miles, 4 miles under the ground. And so far, if there had been a damage to any of these, we would have known about it. The IAEA chief, Grossi, is quoted, I think last night, saying they are monitoring, and so far, no damage to the basics. However, where is Netanyahu on this? He wants this war to become stronger and stronger, more of a pictures of Israelis, civilians being killed, as they have been showing in the last 2 days, and then the US or Europe gets involved, and then the United States has the capability of bunker buster bombs. The planes that the United States has currently moved to the Middle East have such an ability. My own question remains, if they unleashed such an attack, and if there were radiations on the scales that one can expect, it would be far worse than the Chernobyl incident. It certainly would, as the Qataris have said, as the Arabs of the Persian Gulf have said, it will at least endanger the lives of millions of civilians in that area. So that is an issue to be considered. I haven't got a clear answer to that. We also have this concept of regime change. And I noticed that the Guardian today has, or maybe it's the Observer, it appears in social media as the Guardian, saying, oh, are we near a regime change? And there's a lot of talk about Netanyahu addressing the Iranian people first on Friday, saying, you should fight your regime and join our war against the Islamic Republic. And then by Saturday, he's saying, we'll burn the capital flat to the earth. Now, I don't think that's good tactics. I'm no advisor to Netanyahu. But if you're trying to move a population against their government, opposed to their government, it's not a very good idea to tell them, oh, we're going to blow the life out of every single one of you. Having said that, I think regime change is more in the imagination of those sections of the right-wing opposition, the Iran Zionists, the royalists in Iran, or Republican Party paid Mujahideen Khalq, who are really the exact equivalent of Chalabi and people like that in Iraq, except they don't have the base because they supported Saddam Hussein in the Iran-Iraq war. And most ordinary Iranians who talk to, even the non-political ones, hate them more than they hate the Iranian regime, and they remain Islamists. So you can imagine, I don't think they stand much of a chance. With regime change, with the royalists, there are a number of problems. They have some supporters. I'm not denying they have some supporters, mainly gained, as I've kept saying, by the relentless propaganda of pro-Zionist TV stations and other European American TV stations who have always presented Israel as the poor little country surrounded by a modern democracy surrounded by barbarians, Arabs. And of course, the reality, as we know, is that Israel is no democracy. It is a settler colonial country. It imposes apartheid on the population within its borders and so on. So, but this view, this image has had an effect. And of course, the incompetence of the Islamic Republic, the corruption of the leaders of the Islamic Republic, the fact that the country has lived in a state of crisis for 44 years, 45 years since its inception, means that people are tired. There is a tiredness about this regime. However, I think Netanyahu has once again given a gift to the Islamic Republic. If I understand it correctly, some of the demonstrations, probably organized originally by the Iranian government, became huge in Tehran and other major cities. And you can imagine that. The overwhelming sentiment in Iran is one of nationalism, is one of, whether it's correct or not, whether it's acceptable or not, nationalism in Iran has a very long history. Even uneducated people seem to have this foolish pride about 5,000-year history. Some of them say 7,000-year history. So that nationalism, in a way, trumps everything else. And you should not underestimate it. If you do, you are making a mistake. What are the options for Iran? First of all, Iran has lost its allies. At the time when the attacks were happening against Hezbollah, when the attacks were happening against Syria, I think some of us did say, this is not about Syria, this is not about the Lebanon. The main enemy is Iran, as Moshe pointed out. This is what Netanyahu has been working on. I remember I was looking at when did Netanyahu say Iran's nuclear bomb is a threat, and you can go back to 30 years, right? So and 30 years ago he was saying it's only a few years away. 20 years ago he was saying it's a few months away. Now he's saying it's a few days away. But the reality is that Iran is still far from achieving full nuclear capability, partly because it is not about enrichment of uranium. IAEA knows this very well. It's about delivery of nuclear weapons. And Iran's capability to deliver nuclear weapons remains very weak. If you compare the military capabilities of the two countries, I've been privileged to hear this from various experts in the last 24 hours. We are talking of two countries with disproportionate number of population, about 89, 87, 89 million people in Iran, 9 to 10 million in Israel. So the reserve army, the soldiers, the number of soldiers, Iran trumps Israel. But if you go anywhere beyond that, this is a war that will be fought by drones, by missiles, by air force. It's not even going to be a naval war. In all of those, Israel has far more missiles. It has far better drones, if not, it hasn't got more numerically, but it has far better drones. In terms of what has happened so far, we know that occasionally the rarer, better equipped supersonic missiles of Iran's Islamic Republic have penetrated the dome, the famous Iron Dome that is supposed to protect Israel, but many of them are stopped at the dome. So we are in that situation. Iran has lost its allies. Hamas is weak, and with Hamas, you have to keep telling these reporters who ask you, oh, but Iran and Hamas are the same. Iran and Hamas have had a very tumultuous relationship. At times they've been allies. During the Iran-Iraq wars, they were enemies. During the Syrian civil wars, they were actually fighting each other. Um, and in more recent times, Hamas has complained openly and publicly about the lack of support it expected from Iran and Hezbollah in the aftermath of 7th of October. So they are allies, but they've not always been allies. There are contradictions. Use your brain, don't use slogans, don't be so stupid, but you can't tell the reporters this. Iran has lost, most importantly, Syria. Not that the Syrian Assad regime would have been able to do much. He was quite useless. But Iran had bases, military bases with Revolutionary Guards in Syria. I have always argued they're not there because Iran loves Assad, whom it doesn't, Iran's leadership didn't think much of Assad. They are there so that if Israel attacks Iran, they're closer to attack Israel. Iran has had a historic relationship with Hezbollah. That is definitely true, but Hezbollah is considerably weakened. The new government in Lebanon is not giving Hezbollah the kind of free hand it used to have, but also without its charismatic leader Nasrallah, without all sorts of having lost large numbers of people after the horrific incident with these pages, which has frightened not just Hezbollah members, but ordinary Lebanese in terms of what a terrorist state, the Israeli right-wing government, can do to ordinary civilians in the middle of Beirut by blowing them up for no reason, but because they might have attended a Hezbollah meeting. So here we are, or they might be standing next to someone who is a Hezbollah member. So we don't have, Iran hasn't got Hezbollah. It hasn't got Syria. It has got the Houthis. On Friday, I watched videos of the Houthis who every Friday do get about a couple of million people in Sana's main square. Crowds gather and support Palestine. On this Friday night, they were watching live Iran's attack on Tel Aviv, and they were clapping. But that is a very insignificant, if you like, victory, if one could call it a victory. There is no, in this battle, given the balance of forces, given the number of nuclear bombs that Israel has. I heard today Jericho 2 has bombs that has 3,000 kilogram uranium. So we are talking of a completely unbalanced situation. Iran has a couple of options. None of them look good. One of them is to close the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil goes through that. Oil prices have already gone up because of the war, but they will shoot up. It will be a dramatic change. My guess is that China would not want that and would advise Iran against it, but I don't know. The other option, which they have mentioned, is that they could attack US and European citizens. My guess is they will first go for military, but maybe they will go for civilians in neighboring countries. Again, that wouldn't work well for Iran. It would just prompt these countries to stage much harsher attacks and wars against Iran. They might be, and despite the fact that they cancelled the negotiations in Oman today, there might be negotiations going on in secret. I wouldn't put it past the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic hasn't survived because it's a stupid government. It has survived because it is committed to its survival at any cost. We know what happened during the hostage crisis. There we were. And immediately after the hostage crisis, when the hostages were in Lebanon, the US hostages were in Lebanon, we had Iran Gate. So secret negotiations with the imperialist powers, they don't call them imperialists, they don't use Marxist terms, so don't be fooled by those who think Iran is a radical anti-imperialist. They call it world powers. They might be negotiating, we don't know. Just to finish, just a couple of points on what I think are important about the mistakes we shouldn't make. First of all, I think we can't simply compare this with the days of Hopi, Hands of People of Iran. I saw a leaflet today by an Iranian-led organization that was in Hopi saying this is a war between Israel and Iran, nothing to do with the Iranian people. How stupid can you get? It's the Iranian people who are dying. It's the Iranian people whose houses are being destroyed. Israel is a fascist country that is attacking, is an extreme right-wing country, maybe not fascist in the historic terms, but is attacking another country in the region. If this war continues, thousands will die. But more importantly, as Moshe pointed out, starvation in Gaza is still going on. It's not going to stop. It's going to get worse. I saw an IDF leaflet saying Iran is now priority one in our war. Gaza is second. Yes, because in Gaza, they're not fighting, they're starving people to death and they're forcing people out of Gaza. So, yes, in terms of military operations, that might be true, but starvation in Gaza hasn't gone away just because headlines in British and Western media have changed from the terrible situations in Gaza to the war in Iran, against Iran. So no, this is a war with the Iranian people, and those who don't see it haven't understood anything about what is going on. And the first victims of this will be precisely the working class in Iran, those who want to fight against the regime. One of the targets of the Israelis yesterday was two main factories in Tabriz, Asaluye and Traktor Sazi. Both of them places where the workers have waged strikes and opposition have been on demonstrations against the Islamic Republic. Do you think they will continue that? Do you think they will take Netanyahu's flag and support the royalists? No, they won't. Traktor Saudi is one of the places where historically the working class has been left-wing and radical. And of course, they are going to be wondering what to do. And stupid leaflets that separate the Iranian people from this war are not going to gain anything for the Iranian left. On the British left, we've had well, I'm not sure if you can call them left, but we've got people like Alliance for Workers' Liberty telling us that Iran is a sub-imperialist power and an regional imperialist power. And you say, well, Iran can't defend its own capital. Never mind. It's been under sanctions for more decades. It can't feed its own people. How can it be an imperialist power? What is your definition of imperialism if you put such stupid comments on your website? So we are left with a very difficult situation. I think the left is confused. The left in Iran is very weak. The working class is weak. However, I think there will be solidarity with the Palestinians and with the Iranian people, but not with the Iranian regime. Where we will end up with all this is very difficult for me to predict, but I hope, comrades, in the quick Q&A, we can go further and argue some of the aspects of this. Thanks. I finished.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. Comrades, if you have any questions, comments to the speakers, please indicate, raise your hand, and we can bring you in. Just going to follow up from what you were just saying to get the ball rolling, Yasmin. There have been there was an emergency demonstration outside the embassy with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and the Telegraph jumped on the few Iranian flags that were being waved there. And of course, it's outrageous that you have the Iranian flag being shown there. But you explained that, there is a long-held nationalism going on. Also, of course, we have seen that this is a war that started by Israel clearly. So and Iran is fighting back. So you can sort of understand it. However, there are those who look at Iran as part of the axis of resistance, of fighting against imperialism. And if only, the most stupid ones are those calling, if only Iran and Russia and China, if only the world was run by them, wouldn't that be a much better place against Trump's imperialism? Now I know that's I'm taking it a bit far, but it's becoming quite widespread on the left, and it's quite becoming quite a popular point of view. Obviously, I know you said we don't have to support either side. We don't have to side either with the Iranian regime, and we don't have to side with the Israeli regime. But in a war that has been started by one side, what do you think the slogans of the left in Britain should be? And related to that, I mean, you do touch on it, and also was going to ask Moshe about that. The working class movement in both countries is very weak at the moment. Who do we side with? Who do we support? Is there any force that we can actually support in our international solidarity? If you two could just answer those couple of questions first before I bring in other comrades. Do you want to start, Moshe, perhaps?
Yes, I would say yes. The working class movement is very weak in Israel. That is the case in a political sense, if not in the sense of struggle on economic issues, in which it is quite militant. However, what a positive element is the general level of mistrust against Netanyahu, and this pervades Israeli society. A large part of Israeli society, including part of the working class, are very skeptical about Netanyahu's motives. Although in the first flush of war there is a flood of patriotism that inundates the society, including the working class, there is also a residual mistrust of Netanyahu's motives in this, which is important. I would like to take this opportunity to answer two questions that haven't been asked. The level of precision and the effectiveness of the war on both sides. While the Israeli attacks have been very precise, although very careless about damage to civilians, that is to say, they are prepared to target military targets, even if, let us say, this involves a collateral slaughter of many civilians. They are not aiming at the civilians, but they are very blasé about causing this so-called collateral damage. On the other side, I think the Iranian weapons are much less precise and much more or less random. Many of them in their targets. For example, a family of 4 women were killed in the Palestinian Arab village of Tamra in Israel, in the Galilee. That is certainly not part of what the Iranians were aiming at, but simply because the missiles are not very precisely targeted. They are more or less random. A lot of civilian casualties occur not because they are not they are aimed at them, but because they are simply not equipped with precise targeting.
Thank you, Moshe. Yasmin.
Absolutely right, Moshe. I should add that in the carelessness of the Israeli attacks. So the drones they used were actually in Iran. They were planted before. So this wasn't an air attack, as Haaretz and other papers have said. These existed as solid metal inside Iran, presumably taken in not just by Mossad agents, but now we think maybe Europeans and Americans as well. But the buildings they have brought down have had a lot of victims. So this is North Tehran because these people weren't poor people. They weren't living in the shanty towns. They lived in the posh part of Tehran. And building blocks have been seriously damaged. But then the flats above and below these people, there are lots of dead people. One is 20 children died in one place. And that, I think, was some kind of, I don't know, orphanage or something. There are a number of pictures of women, children dying in pictures being distributed. In terms of your question, Tina, which is important, I think we have to call for clear defeatism for Israel, defeatism for US position, defeatism for US allies of Israeli allies in Europe, UK included. So we are calling for that defeatism. I think that should be the defeat of the imperialists, the defeat of Israel must be high on the agenda. It's not similar to other situations. We have to be very clear on that. I think we can say we see this as a war against the Iranian people, and we support the Iranian people without calling for victory of the Islamic Republic. I think that is something that would be very difficult to. I don't think even the Iranian people inside Iran that would go well. In terms of the axis of resistance, well, China and Russia don't consider themselves part of the axis of resistance. They are in the background, they occasionally help, occasionally they don't help. My question would remain that if China is so concerned, the second in power of the capitalist world, where has it been during the starvation in Gaza? Greta from Sweden took a boat. Okay, it was obvious it wouldn't win. Yeah, we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, but she went. There's these French people walking in the heat of the summer in Egypt, trying to get to Gaza to support the Gazan population. Where is the wonderful China? Where is the Russian Navy? Why hasn't it tried to give food to the Gazan population? These people are after their own interests. They're not, I think for China, the question is, okay, if their oil, cheap oil from Iran is stopped, then they might start some action. I don't know what. But beyond that, the only thing we have seen so far is resolutions which they know will be vetoed by US in UN. So where are they exactly? I would like someone to educate me on China's great efforts to help the population of Gaza when they first faced starvation.
Thank you. Opening up the floor now, comrades. I'm taking 2 or 3 questions and then bringing back the main speakers. Ken, please. Can you unmute? There you are. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Moshe and Yasmina. Now, this is almost a rhetorical question, but not quite. The evidence of Iraq and Libya suggests that in these attacks, there is very little, probably no planning for day two. But I wonder if Netanyahu's call for the population of Iran to rise up is anything other than rhetoric, or is it an indicator that Mossad somehow or other has planted, cultivated, funded some, quote, opposition, unquote, which will surface if the Iranian regime falls? My suspicion is there is no such planning because typically nobody seemed to have a clue as to what they would do in Iraq after their alleged victory there, nor did they have a clue in Libya. But I'd be interested for your own thoughts on that particular speculation. And one sub-question: if the Iranians continue to destroy so much of the the Israelis continue to destroy so much of the Iranian arms manufacturing capability, this may have an impact on the drones that are supplied to Putin for his war in Ukraine. It's reported that Trump and Putin had a conversation which was characterized as useful. But I wonder if that has, how far that will have any impact on Ukraine, or whether Trump has simply assured Putin that he won't stand in his way anyway and he doesn't really need the drones, question mark. But thank you, and thank you very much for your comments on the current situation.
Thank you, Ken. Ian, please.
Good evening, comrades, and thank you for the presentations. As always, very informative. I just wanted to comment a little bit on Britain's direct involvement in the genocide. There has been, of course, the revelation, so parliamentary answer dated 11th of June 2025. Ministry of Defence confirmed that the British forces are currently training personnel from the Israeli Defence Force on UK soil. The response delivered by Labour MP Luke Pollard stated that this is part of a routine defence engagement with Israel. And of course, it's been presented as something which is actually quite new, or somehow isn't it strange that this is going on despite everything that's happening in Gaza? This has been going on for decades, for generations. I mean, RAF Akrotiri is used as a very convenient stopover place, not just for British surveillance flights over Gaza, but it's also, of course, an important staging point for US troops and US military material going directly to Israel. Although British politicians have said that they're not actually shipping military material, they are, of course, supplying parts for F-35s, and it's been going on for generations. It's not. There's nothing new in this. However, what is different, I suppose, is that that they've had to actually admit that it goes on despite the genocide in Gaza. The other thing I wanted to just mention a little bit as well was some glimmer of optimism in the shape of the CGT in Marseille, stopping some arms shipments going to Israel, as well as in Italy. And I think somebody has been sacked in Sweden for trying to stop it. By contrast, in Britain, the British trade union movement seems to be almost completely mute or avoiding the possibility whatsoever of any kind of industrial action being taken to prevent arms shipments to Israel. I know from our local struggle is in Newcastle on Tyne, where Rafael, which makes drone parts for the Israeli Defence Force, is regularly picketed on a Saturday, but it can achieve absolutely nothing that way. If you ever go to what was the old Armstrong arms factory in Newcastle upon Tyne, the securities, you're looking at high fences, razor wire, the surveillance inside the factory, infrared cameras and so on, you wouldn't get very far, even if you tried to scale the fence. And the pickets, such as they are, it's on a Saturday. There isn't much going on anyway. It just becomes a small demonstration and largely futile. Some of the demonstrations in Newcastle have been fairly substantial, but there's a certain war weariness taking place there. I will certainly be at the Palestine Solidarity demonstration in London on the 21st. So really, the only other thing that occurred to me was whilst I completely agree with what Yasmin was saying about the stance that we take, it is noticeable that some have started with the usual stuff, or victory to Iran kind of thing, whether that is even remotely sensible in the context of where we stand. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Rafal, and then I'll bring the two main speakers back.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation from both speakers today. I'd just like to raise a point as to what Yasmin said regarding support for the question of whether this war is a war against the Iranian people, the Iranian working class, or whether it's a war against the Iranian state and the rulers of Iran. And while I agree with the general position that Israel is in this case the aggressor, I would describe Israel as a fascistic society and state, and that we certainly do not want to see a total defeat of Iran and the sort of fate of Syria, Libya, that seems to be the modus operandi of the of American imperialism in the Middle East. But I think it's a rather weak argument to claim that, well, this war is not a war against the Iranian ruling class because it's killing Iranian workers. That is the case in every war. There are no wars where the ruling class kills each other. It's always a war of the workers against the workers. So I don't think that's a very strong argument. Moreover, the question of, well, this is not we cannot apply, Iran cannot be called imperialist, so this cannot be called an imperialist war because Iran is weak, it's under sanctions. I don't think that entirely holds up because that fundamentally ignores the wider geopolitical picture. In 1917, we did not see, the Zimmerwald left cry out for poor little Serbia, which, must be supported because it is a weak state that is being bullied by a larger state. There's a wider geopolitical picture to consider. Iran, I would not say that Iran is a direct proxy of China. I don't think China's power is sufficient to have those sorts of imperialist proxies. But nonetheless, we cannot pretend that this conflict is one that's happening in total isolation, where Israel is simply ganging up on weak Iran. Israel is an American proxy to a large extent, and its aims are not exclusively internally aims that are the results of its own internal politics. That's pretty much my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafal. Yasmin, do you want to come back on that?
Goes there, I can't see it. I'll unmute myself, sorry. Thanks. I'll start with Rafa. I'm not saying the war is against the Iranian people because they are the victims, but I am saying that because Israel's plans in the region are not about just the governments, but the peoples of the region. That's why I don't think it's just about Hamas. If Hamas didn't exist, and I've heard it from many people who've studied the region, there would have been a genocide in Gaza because Israel wants to assert its power, as Moshe explained very well. In the same way, I think even if the Islamic Republic didn't exist, Israel wants to become the major power of the region. And in that way, it would attack any country that it sees as a rival, as a regional rival. And a country with 90 million multi-nations in it would be considered an enemy. So this war isn't simply, I didn't say this has nothing to do with the Islamic Republic and its many terrible policies, including the fact that I think both Moshe and I have always argued against a nuclear Middle East and therefore against Iran having nuclear industry and enrichment of uranium. However, there is a very obvious imbalance here. You have a country that has hundreds of bombs, doesn't sign it, and then you have the Islamic Republic. So there is proportionality in what you say on that. And the question remains that it's not just that the Iranian people are the victims of this, it is that the Israeli government is attacking that whole country, irrespective of, I would have said, irrespective of its leaders, unless it was the royalists, the Shah, the pro-Zionist forces, because they lost an ally in the departure of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Now they want to reinstall his son, and I'll come back to that. The AWL's claim about Iran being imperialist is based on the fact that the pro-Zionist Kurds that AWL supports, and they are actually paid and financed by Mossad, are subjugated by Iran. And that is the imperialism of Iran. And I think that is really not correct. That's historically not something we can defend. Iran hasn't taken over any other country. I've opposed Iran's Islamic Republic my entire adult life, but I don't make up stories in order to justify that. There are very good reasons why one should oppose Iran's Islamic Republic. And Iran is not just not a proxy of China. Iran's leadership, its current leadership, is very keen for relationships with the United States. Its previous leaderships were in the same position. Iran has done everything it can to become a servant of the imperialist powers, and it's still doing that. So this idea that Iran is a proxy of China is just Western propaganda. Yes, it has been thrown into that position during some times because of the isolation, because nobody else would deal with it, because countries faced billions of dollars of fines if they were dealing with Iran, and it has at times done that. But look at Iran's history in the Iraq-US war. Look at Iran's history in the Afghan war. In all of those, Iran did its best to support the United States. It's the United States that, as some comrades have said, can't forgive Iran for getting rid of their man in power, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So I don't buy Iran being a proxy of China. Yes, there is a 25-year deal, but that doesn't make Iran a proxy of China. And I would say that's part of Western media illusions created by the Western media. In terms of what Ken was saying, I think Iraq and Libya are the scenarios. I think Libya is more the scenario we are looking at, because regarding Iraq, as stupid as the United States was, they had Chalabi. They wanted to replace Saddam with the Shia National Council, which they had been grooming in Washington, and we know the disaster that was. Mossad has cultivated, funded, done propaganda for the royalists. When we go to demonstrations in London, we see the royalists with their flag and the pictures of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi with the Zionists. They're in the same enclave. police separates us from these demonstrators. So clearly they exist. You can't deny their existence. The question is, do they have any significance inside Iran? I don't think so. They have very good publicity machines. They have thousands of accounts in X, in Facebook, in social media, financed by Israel, very often bots, because you can see the same message happening time and time again. It's clearly bots. But I think they don't have or at least they don't have what they thought they have inside Iran, and we can see it now. In terms of the drones to Putin, I don't think Iran's drones are the only things that is helping Putin. They are not, they are very cheaply made, they don't last long, and my understanding is it's the numbers, because Iran can produce thousands of these on a cheap scale, the Russians use it. I don't think Putin and Trump will worry too much about the drones. I think they would worry more about the long-term consequences of this war. Maybe the drones were mentioned, but I really don't think the drones are part of that. To Ian's comment, the only thing I would add is that, yes, I think we are seeing an increased number of protests in France, in Portugal, in Spain. Heard about Portugal as well. These are important struggles, but on their own, unfortunately, they can't do much. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Moshe, do you want to reply to a few things? Sorry, you need to unmute, comrade.
Yes, briefly, as to the plans for the day after. Netanyahu is accused for not having a plan for the day after in Gaza. That is because this remark is addressed by people who don't realize that he has a very definite plan for the day after, not for a settlement, which is not in his book, but ethnic cleansing of the population of Gaza, annexing it to Israel and colonizing it with Zionist settlers. As to the plans regarding Iran, there have been some speculations about it in the Israeli press for a long time. What would be, from the Israeli point of view, the achievement of a conflict with Iran? And I think what has emerged from this is the following. I would say that the Israeli war, if it achieves its maximal, let us say, targets, is not aimed against the Iranian state, but against Iran as a country. That is to say, and I think this is an important distinction. This is not an Israeli war against this specific regime. Of course, they would like to, if they can replace it with a Shah regime, that would be regarded as an achievement. But ideally, if you like, what they would like to do is to break up Iran totally as a country. And I think whatever attitude we on the left take towards this war, we have to be aware of this distinction. It is not the same thing. So it is aimed against Iran as a nation, or as a country which is a multinational country. I think this is an important distinction to make.
Thank you, Moshe. Anne, please.
Hi. Okay, thank you very much for the really interesting talks. I okay, so my response is in relation to the Palestine Solidarity Movement, because I think it's very important that we get the line or the approach correct. Um, but my impression immediately is that it has strengthened the movement against Israel. And even like yesterday, just anecdotally, I was out doing a street collection all day uh, for a local solidarity initiative with a town in the north of Gaza. And almost everybody who stopped to speak to me spoke about how outrageous it was that Israel has attacked Iran. And they understood that there was no reason for Israel to attack Iran other than the fact that Israel wants to spread the war um, in order to really take the attention away from what's happening in Gaza. That was the general approach of people I spoke to. That's ordinary people, ordinary supporters of Palestine. And so I think it's really important because I agree with them in large part. And I think what Moshe was saying about the sort of symbiotic relationship between Israel's Zionist plan to take all of Palestine and force the people out, either through death or through mass expulsion, and its dominance in the Middle East. Um, I think that's a really interesting, important point, and I think that that's something that we should consider more closely. And perhaps Moshe, you're going to write, and I think it would be really useful to write on that at the moment, or at the very least refer us to articles where you've written about this question before, because I think that like for us to get into the whole question about whether what Iran is, in a certain sense, is a diversion, and is the kind of diversion that Israel wants. Um, and I think that, like, of course, the Iranian state is a reactionary state that oppresses its people, but Israel is killing those people and then wanting them to stage a regime change from, to encourage them to overthrow their state, which is really quite like laughable given what given what Israel is doing to women in in Palestine, that it expects women in Iran to follow its, to be inspired by its call. I mean, perhaps there are some, but I would imagine that, as Yasmina will tell us, that most people in Iran haven't seen what's been happening in Palestine for the last 19 months, will laugh at the notion of Israel praising itself as any kind of liberator. Anyway, so that really is my point. I think that it's I know that the huge difficulty with the movement is it not having any ability, or so it seems at the moment, to change anything that the capitalist states are doing. But it exists, and it's important to people to continue to resist. And so therefore I think our approach to the movement, the slogans of the movement, are, it's useful for us to be considered in them. And I think that for us to take an approach of the main enemy is at home, and to include in that Iran at the present time, would be a bit of a strange one. I don't think we can raise regime change from below at this time in Iran, because of the fact that this is a project which is the Zionist project, and the main question here has to be the defeat of Israel, and the US Israeli project in the Middle East. That's the main question here, and I think that we shouldn't be diverted from that. Of course, we should say that we're defending the Iranian people. We're not defending the Ayatollahs, but I mean, I know that there have been some senior Ayatollahs and their advisors, as well as scientists who've been murdered by the Israeli regime. But I think it's kind of obvious that in this situation, you're not defending the state, you're defending the people. Of course, there will be those who will have illusions in the whole, axis of resistance. But I think that, well, they're always there. But the notion that, anyway, so I suppose I've said my point. I don't want to repeat myself. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Anne. Ben.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you to our two presenters and other contributors, particularly Ian Spencer. I don't think it was he who failed to point out that Luke Pollard, the apologist, an apologist for Israel, is not just a Labour MP, but a junior minister in, I think, actually defence. And its defence, I think, is particularly important as far as the situation and mood in the UK is concerned. There's a huge swell of, if you like, social imperialist support for any arms production whatsoever in this country, and for any increase in arms production. And it's not simply the economistic GMB and trade unionist line. Starmer made it very, very plain indeed in his recent speeches that the UK has got to exercise leadership, which, as far as I can see, extends well into vigorously assisting the Israeli genocide, mainly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. The noisy threats about any attacks on British bases should surely be met at the minimum with pointing out that these bases, Akrotiri, Dakhiliyah, the Gulf mini-states, and indeed, for that matter, Diego Garcia, are all instruments of imperialist aggression and domination. We should press the British state to reverse course as best as we can. We should not be tempted by arguments that opposing Israeli aggression and genocide is taking sides in an imperialist war. We don't have to take the Iranian side. We have to point out that the enemy at home here is vigorously supporting Israeli genocide and expansion. And I think I should leave it there rather than inquire about my vague memories of, was it Mujahideen a Khalq? The fact that Christine Amanpour and the Shah's son have appeared unquestioned and supported on British television this morning. Well, it can't have been on Al Jazeera, surely. But let's not get involved in what's happening in Iran. except insofar as we oppose Israeli aggression. Thank you. End of.
Thanks. Jack, please.
Yeah, thanks for the opening. I think when we're talking about the present situation, or for that matter, the past, I think we need to be cautious when we draw analogies. In the big picture, I think it's correct to talk about us being in a situation that's analogous, comparable to, lessons thereof with World War One. I think that's absolutely correct. The problem we've got, of course, is that unlike World War One, where's the working class movement? Where's the socialist alternative? That's the first point I would make. So I myself, I have no hesitation in saying that if you take Ukraine, Ukraine, as far as I can see it, is a proxy of the United States and the EU and the leading EU powers. We can go into Trump and all the rest of it, but that I think has been clear for well over a decade. On the other hand, if we look at Iran and then start talking about, I can't remember who was big and who was little and who was plucky and who was what in World War One, but poor little Belgium, plucky little Serbia, that sort of type idea. I think that's the right way round. I cannot for the life of me. So while I can see the bigger picture, China is the target of the United States, and we could draw the analogy of Russia and Austro-Hungary or something along those lines. I cannot draw an analogy. I don't want to draw an analogy. That's the point. With Iran or Iran and Serbia and Belgium. Why? Because it's already been said, and I think it's true that actually Iran isn't a proxy for anyone. It might have relationships with China, and undoubtedly it does. It's certainly been supplying arms to Russia. But I mean, are we in a situation of where Russia or China is going to come to the aid of or use Iran precisely as its proxy? Well, maybe, but I don't see any evidence of that at the present time. That's all I can say. I see quite the opposite. We're not going to get involved. That's what I can see at the moment. Now, that could change. So I'd be very cautious myself in drawing the Serbia analogy. I don't think that Iran is useful in that respect. I think Ukraine is, and again, analogies all break down, and you don't want to push it too far. It's just a first stab at getting concrete in a situation. In terms of what Anne was saying, okay, amongst Netanyahu's calculations, I'm sure you're right that Gaza and the West Bank will be there for precisely the reasons that Moshe said, that Israel has, all of Zionist opinion is committed to a political economy of colonialism, which means expansion, which means expulsion. So I'm sure that's not irrelevant. But there is the question from Netanyahu's point of view, precisely of regional domination. And I wouldn't myself say, oh, this is all about Gaza, because I'd also say it's also about the West Bank, but it's also about Iran itself representing some sort of potential regional rival. Clearly, Iran, with sanctions and with the wars fronted by Israel against its allies is in a situation of what we're talking about is radical inequality now, absolutely radical. I mean, in an earlier meeting today, again, analogies break down, but so forgive me. But I mean, I drew the analogy now between what Iran is capable of doing and what Israel is capable of doing to the equivalent of the US, what do they call them? The Indian Wars, the Frontier Wars. Um, Iran is capable of launching arrows from a bow and arrow. That's really the analogy I've drawn, where Israel is equipped with cannons, Gatling guns, and repeater rifles. Okay, we're now in the 21st century. We're now in a situation where Israel, as far as I understand it, Yasmin, tell me if I'm wrong. I know we've got shoulder-launched missiles, but my understanding is that Israel has control over of Iran's airspace. That's my understanding. And so, what is going on? I don't know about longer term aims. I don't see, regime change. I can see regime collapse being part of the agenda, but regime change means you've got to have something to put in its place. And we've mentioned MEK. Well, that's a joke. I mean, you would know far more than I would, Yasmin, but I mean, my own take on it is from what I can see. I think the royalists might have some support, but they're not going to come onto the streets. They're not going to stage a military coup. They're not going to be put in power by Israel. There's not going to be a land war anytime that I can see. So to me, what we're going to see, I fear, is to use a phrase from the Vietnam War, bombing Iran back into the Stone Age. That's my fear. So a degrading of Iran, taking away its power stations, taking away its infrastructure, just destroying the situation. And maybe out of that rubble will come a number of states. I just can't predict it. But anyway, the point I'm really making is I cannot see, I cannot at the moment see anyone coming to Iran's rescue. And therefore, I'm discounting the analogy with Serbia or Belgium. It's not being used by anybody. If it's being used, it's by Israel, okay, as a cover for expansion, but it's also Israel has had this aim of knocking Iran out. Moshe said it for decades, and that's clearly the case. So I think that's what's going on. I think, yeah, just a final point on that. I don't think that we want to just be silent. I mean, in terms of our thought, okay, we're not going to talk about the internal situation in Iran. I think we can. I think what we can say is the left is in no position to do anything except to take a moral stance. And if I was going to give some advice, and who the hell am I to give advice, but I just float this one, that if we're talking about real defense of Iran, then what we're talking about is, well, there has to be democracy. There has to be working class leadership. That has to be the situation. So what we need to be saying, I think, is that the Ayatollahs have led Iran to a disaster. And that, yes, if the working class was strong enough, it ought to overthrow. But it clearly doesn't want to be part of it doesn't want to be an adjunct of the royalists. It doesn't want to be an adjunct, an agent of Israeli state degrading. So that's a narrow line to tread. But I don't think that we want to be a victory for Iran as it stands. That's what I would be arguing. But I do think that our defense of Iran against Israel ought to be along the lines of effective defense means democracy, means the end of this regime and its repression, something along those lines. In other words, we need a situation of where the working class is free to organize. It needs the oxygen to become a class. They're just ideas.
Thanks, Jack. Yasmin and Moshe, if you want to come in, could you just sort of indicate? Otherwise, I'll take more comrades because there are quite a lot of people with their hand up. Okay. Paul, please.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Let's just get the old cat out of the way. Yeah. Jack's actually raised a point that I was pondering myself. Is that a good propaganda point would be that the Islamist regime in Tehran is all very good at repressing workers and women who have actually democratic rights and so forth, but it can't defend the country against Israel. I mean, you look at the way that Israel had been able to fly unimpeded into Iranian airspace and cause all sorts of damage. And the regime itself has proved utterly incapable, and its response has been to lob a few missiles to cause minor damage to non-essential targets in Israel. In other words, it has proved incapable of a real defence of the country. And I think that could be a good propaganda point. Yes, Jack, I think, put it very clearly that the defence of Iran against imperialism and its client regimes such as Israel can't be placed in the hands of the mullahs. It has to be a democratic defence, which means mass mobilisation of the working class and of other social forces, which means basically coming up against the power of the mullahs. And the mullahs would rather capitulate to imperialism, I believe, than actually allow that as an effective defence of the country. Yeah, actually, very interesting comment earlier talked about Pahlavi Jr. appearing on the telly this morning. It was on the Laura Kuenssberg show on the BBC. And it was, I thought, very amusing to see the son of the Shah talking about fighting for democracy. And of course, her as a telly presenter, not particularly historically aware, he gave her an open goal there. She could have said, well, how did your father get into power, eh? Was that through democracy, or was that through the overthrow of the only democratic government that Iran's ever had? When Mossadegh was overthrown 60-odd years ago in an operation which was started actually by a Labour government and then taken up by the Americans, and the Tories, when they came in, took it over. That would have made a very good propaganda point against the monarchists, that, they didn't come in democratically. And the other thing that was raised is the point that Moshe made, and was taken up again by the comrades, that are we talking about Israeli plans for Iran is like, from what Moshe was saying, is like Syria, but on a mass scale. The complete demolition of a relatively coherent nation state. And if that's the case, then this would be an utter chaotic Middle East, because we've seen this in Iraq after the 20 years ago with the toppling of the Ba'athist regime. We've seen it in Libya with the collapse of the Gaddafi's Jabraya regime. We've seen it in Syria with the overthrow of, or collapse of the Ba'athist regime there, the rival Ba'athist regime there, and rather ironically, seeing that going on about Islamist regimes in Iran, they've been the beneficiary in all three cases of the crash of secular dictatorships. They've allowed. We've seen in Syria. Okay, they gave him a nice suit and trimmed his beard up a bit. They've let an Al Qaeda affiliate become head of government of a collapsed state. Now, this is a recipe, I feel, for utter chaos. And Iran is a massive country. It's it stretches from the borders of what was the Soviet Union right away down to the Arabian Gulf and so forth. It's a massive country. And also, Yasmin, I'm sure, will be able to tell us far more detail. The national question in Iran, where the is a mass of different nationalities which could be manipulated by imperialism and so forth. Now, the thing is, if I wind up with a question to Yasmin and to Moisha, this might be what the Israeli government wants, is the disintegration of every state in the Middle East. But is that what American imperialism wants? Is it what European imperialisms want? If Yasmin and Moisha could say a bit on what the big imperialists want, I think would be very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Sorry for hurrying you along. We've still got people who want to speak. So, comrades, if you could keep it short, please, that'd be great. Keith, please.
Okay, thanks. Might be hard to keep it short, but I'll do my best. The Iranian theocracy talk about the great Satan USA and the little Satan Israel. Now, we're all good secularists here, but what I'm hearing is a view of geopolitics, which is something very similar, that somehow there's imperialist states and non-imperialist states. And I'm sorry, comrades, but you're wrong. We live and have lived for a long time in a world economy in which all states are dependent on their relationships within the imperialist nexus. And unless we get a grip on that, we've got real problems, because you will all have noticed that everyone from the governments of states to the bourgeois commentators to aware would-be communists are all aware that we're now embarked in a slide towards a Third World War. Now, I'm sure you can't have missed that, because it has been in the papers, so it must be true. But quite clearly, over the last period, this has been a growing tendency, and it impacts on every aspect of geopolitics, on every aspect of intrastate and politics within the states. So we have to be very clear that when we're trying to hark back to the politics of the main enemy is at home, which I still think is a very good slogan, then what we're saying is, yes, workers have to oppose their own bourgeois states, and that's in every state on this planet. Workers have to oppose their state. But that doesn't mean that our enemy's enemy is our friend. It means that our enemy's enemy is another load of cutthroat, thieving bastards who've got control of an area of the planet. So let's be very, very careful. We are not, or we shouldn't be, in favor of the lesser evils. It's entirely irrelevant which state has shot the first bullet in any particular war, because it's all part of the slide towards a Third World War. Yes, Ukraine is backed by the European Union. Yes, it's backed by NATO, but that doesn't mean that we have anything in common or there's anything progressive about Putin's Russia trying to grab slices of it. The struggle that we have to have and it's not easy because the working class is infinitely pushed back from where we were in 1914, and comrades have already made that point, is that we do have to look wherever we can for workers resisting their own regimes. Moshe will know a lot better than me that there's people refusing the draft in Israel, there's officers refusing to carry out orders in Israel. This is a tiny minority, I know this, but that hope, that's where our hope is. It's not in the hopes of people who are waving flags for a would-be Palestinian state. Because let's be absolutely clear, Moshe is absolutely right that the Zionist project, the Israeli state, always only existed because of imperialist sponsorship from the bigger powers. That would apply absolutely to a new Palestinian state or a new Kurdish state or a new state established anywhere in the world. There's no part of the world which is free from the influence of the power of capital, and the power of capital for at least 100 years has expressed itself in a global economy. We have to clear our minds. Comrades are talking about this big pro-Palestinian demonstration on June the 21st. And let's be clear, a slogan that's in support of workers' revolution, which is the only project we're supporting these days, okay, can't simultaneously be in support of this national solution or that national solution or that bit of new nationhood. So we've got some big challenges, but we can't answer them by picking up support for defensive states or the states who didn't happen to fire the first bullet in a particular conflict. Thank you, comrades.
Mike, please.
Lastly, I intended to say something well, this relates to what the comrade just said, which I don't think I agree with. And the issue is there's two issues which are involved. The first is at the end of the day, this is the whatever the hell one thinks about the relationship between the United States and Israel, the Israeli state could not have carried out this attack on Iran without the say-so admission, acceptance of the United States. The literal technical embroilment of the Israeli IDF armed forces, the fact that the kit which they will have used is dependent on continuous resupply from the United States, both of munitions and of arms. It has to be the case that the United States agreed to this attack. And if we ask the question, why has the United States agreed to this attack? I can see Moshe's point about why the Israeli state might want to do this. Why has the United States agreed to this attack? The answer is, in the first place, that the United States, this is the delayed revenge of the United States for 1979, which I think Yasmin made the point earlier on. Yeah. The United States has been inculcating among its armed forces, or the US armed forces has been inculcating among itself forever, the need for revenge on Iran and for revenge on Shia, quote, terrorism, both for the embassy siege in 1979-80 and for the attack on Marine barracks in Lebanon, in Beirut in the 1980s. But secondly, if we ask this, the question is, decreasing, that's in a sense saying that the United States acts decreasingly rationally. Yeah. And I think that it's clear that the United States does act decreasingly rationally, but it's also clear that the United States, we talked about is that what's the day after? What's the plan for the day after? The reality, if we think about what the United States has done since its defeat in Vietnam, the policy of the United States since its defeat in Vietnam has been consistently to simply inflict destruction on countries which in any way diss the United States. And we can see this with the United States support for the Khmer Rouge after the Vietnamese booted out the Khmer Rouge when they went mad in the year zero. We can see it in the United States support for quote insurgent groups run out of South Africa in Mozambique and Angola already in the 1970s. We can see it in the United States support for Israeli intervention in the Lebanese civil war in the 1970s. We can see it in the upshot of well, we can see it in the United States support for Islamist guerrillas in Afghanistan, which began, in fact, before the fall of the Dawood regime. The United States was arming Islamist guerrillas against the Dawood regime and continued to arm Islamist guerrillas against the PDPA, the Afghan Communist Party regime, before what was then briefed as US invasion, as a Soviet invasion. We can see it in, I said in Somalia, we can see it in most recently in sense of, okay, knockdown, they create a sort of superficial appearance of a state in Iraq, but in fact it's just a system of warlordism. We can see it in what the enormously destructive Saudi intervention in Yemen. We can see it in what the so-called humanitarian intervention in Libya, etc., etc., etc. We should expect what we're seeing actually is barbarism, and we're seeing barbarism because the form of the United States entered around 1970 into relative decline, just as the United Kingdom, which was the world dominant power, entered into relative decline around the middle 1850s. But the form of the relative decline of the United Kingdom was the creation of the great European empires, because the United Kingdom deployed its Indian army to take territory and protect the territory against competition from the United States, Germany, etc., etc., etc. And the French, the Germans, the United States then embarked on similar plans of taking territory. But the United States is unable to persuade enough people to go and be settler colonists and be overseas military operators, actually, for the United States to actually run a territorial empire in the European style, which reflects the general decline of capitalism. And the consequence then is that as the United States enters into decline, its policy is simply to smash, to destroy. Okay, so in that context, it's not how shall I put it? It's misconceived to imagine that this is Iran as a proxy for China and this is an inter-imperialist war, etc. Let alone that Iran is an imperialist power because it's etc. This is purely and simply the latest iteration of the scale of the destructive operations of the United States as it declines get larger and larger. This is purely and simply the latest iteration of that through Israel as the proxy for the United States. In that context, yeah, I think Jack is in a sense right in the sense that if we were trying to think, the question is, is he really going to persuade anybody in Iran, the working class of Iran, that it's in their interests for the Iranian state to be defeated and destroyed by the United States? it's like the effort of the Trotskyists in 1940-41 to try and hold on to dual defeatist position in the Second World War, which destroyed the Trotskyist organizations in China and Vietnam, and splintered the organization in France into splintered the organizations in France and Britain into pieces. Having said that, actually, what can be practically done, because the nature of the attack on Iran is not one which it's obvious, it's not like, in that sense, it's not like the Japanese invasion of China or the Japanese invasion of Indochina or the German invasion of it's simply the United States creating destruction. In that sense, Jack is correct that you have to say that the regime itself is incapable of defending Iran against the Israeli state and the Americans. But at the same time, the only thing which could defend Iran against the Israeli state and the Americans is an international movement of the working class, which saw its task as being to overthrow the global tyranny of the United States, which is the form which the tyranny of capital is not tyranny of capital in umpteen local states. It's the tyranny of capital centralized in US capital. That's it.
And
hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, now you muted yourself. We can't hear you.
I think you can hear me now, can you?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to keep this very, very brief. I was going to make quite a long intervention, but I think Keith beat me to it. And he said pretty much everything that I was going to say. So my intervention now is going to have to be very, very much curtailed. First of all, just like to answer a few points that's been raised recently. The last few messages in the chat. Yeah, nobody forcing me to come and speak here. I do this because I think it's a good thing to present Marxist perspectives, not only to yourselves who are present, but to the world that watches this on YouTube. And believe you me, there are people watching this outside of this little select circle. And I think that telling people whose opinion you don't like, that you're free to leave, it's not really very consistent with all your extreme democracy and your tolerance of factions and all the rest of it that you promote. However, let's leave that aside. So the only thing I'm going to say that is of a hopefully slightly different is what is the message to workers in the UK and the world over. Okay, Yasmin can complain all she likes, but what I heard, however veiled and however indirect, was for the defeat of Israel, the support of the Iranian people, which somehow she can separate from the Iranian regime, which obviously the bombs don't do. And I think at one point Anne said something like, we have to defeat the USA. I can't quote that precisely. I'll have to look back and see exactly what she said. But I think I think exactly as Keith was saying. But I'm going to put it in slightly different words, and hopefully just reduce it to the essentials. We cannot support XYZ regime. They're all ruling class dictatorships. They will do whatever it takes to maintain class domination. So the veneer, the fig leaf of democracy means nothing. As soon as the working class raises its head, as soon as the working class puts the system into under challenge, under threat, then the ruling class of any regime, regardless of all the so-called democratic rights and all the rest of it, will do exactly what is required to maintain its class dictatorship. And there is no regime so bad and so awful that we have to support another one. I think that there's you're just putting layer upon layer upon layer of confusion. There is anything progressive now outside of the revolutionary abolition of capitalism. So, any support or any excuse for nationalism, self-determination, fighting for democratic gains under capitalism, reforms, welfare, cooperatives, Conrad again, democracy, democracy, democracy. Under capitalism, democracy is a total sham. As I say, as soon as we move, we'll see that iron fist. And a little glimpse of that was a miners' strike of 84, 85. It doesn't matter what the laws are. It doesn't matter what the democratic rights are, and all the rest of it. The ruling class will save itself at our expense. It will do whatever it takes. There's only one way out now. So people complaining that oh, it's all slogans. It's dogma. Slogans and dogma. But it's reality. There is only one way out for the working class. Class struggle. And creating the Revolutionary Party and marrying the two. Okay, I'll start. You can do the little finger, Tina. I'll start.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Stan, very briefly, though, if you could, please.
Very briefly, I don't know. Yes, funny thing is, I agree with a lot of what Stuart said, but we've had our position on Iran for a long time. Hands off the people of Iran and no to the theocracy, isn't it? So we want both, don't we? And I think the slogan of "a main enemy is at home" is quite appropriate for us in Britain about our government. The main thing, for our point of view, the main task for us is to get our government out of it, to get our state, the British state, out of it. And of course, you do that by building up fulfilling our aim of making a communist party, by strengthening the working class and by threatening the state with overthrow. I know we're not in a position to do the overthrow, but that's what we need to say, and we should support any, whatever the movement in Iran is, which has that aim, which follows the same thing. The main enemy is at home in Iran for the Iranian people, and the main enemy is at home in Britain for the British people, or for people in Britain. So, I mean, I think it's been mentioned, hasn't it? Israel is a nuclear power. The hypocrisy of this business of saying you can't have a bomb, without admitting we've got one. I mean, that is, pathetic, isn't it? But that's the hypocrisy of it. The Iranian state now is proved itself part of the capitalist world order, hasn't it? We know that on the face of it, they got this rhetoric about imperialism and the US devil and all that, but actually they've been complying with all the requirements of austerity, the World Bank, and the economic requirements of capitalist austerity. They've done all that, just like any good capitalist subordinate to the United States. Israel's aims, we know, is to complete the colonization, isn't it? Part of the Zionist aims, in other words. Their ideological thing is about this making sure they can sustain a so-called Jewish state or a Zionist state of Jewish majority, which means ethnic cleansing and all that that's going on. But it also is as has been said, the local hegemon. They want to be the local regional, if you like, Middle East hegemon for the United States. But remember, that was previously the Shah, wasn't it? For a long period, it wasn't just Israel, but it was also the Shah in Iran was operating as a subordinate local hegemon for the United States. Correct me if I'm wrong. United States aims is to remain top dog, isn't it? Their aims in the Middle East is to control the oil taps, to make sure they've got to say so as to whether who can have the oil in future, in future situations which may arise, that may become crucial. I know there's oil in other places, but it's not so much that they want to have the oil, it's that they want to make sure their rivals, whenever rivals are on the table, their rivals can't get the oil. They have the ability to deny it. That's why they want to dominate the Middle East. The other US aim, of course, is temporary, I think, to support Israel so long as Israel
is worthwhile for them. As long as Israel is their attack dog in the Middle East, then it's valuable. But if it turns out, if circumstances change and Israel is no longer useful to the United States, it will ditch it. So that's the United States doesn't have any permanent commitment to Israel. It has at the moment, but so our aim in this war should be to step up our activity to overthrow the British state, which means, organising into a communist party and all that goes with it. We've got that aim. We don't need to change our aim in that respect. But the war, the fact that there's an active war going on, makes it more urgent. I sort of like.
Can you start winding up, Stan?
I'll start winding up. But Mike's point about the revenge, I think you take that into account, what's in the mind of the Americans or some of the Americans, but it's hardly a reason, strategically, it's a question of United States staying on top in the world, isn't it? That's their overriding aim. And the revenge idea can only be an aspect of it, I think. The fact that they have done destruction, yeah, is quite clear. Whether that means that Iran, it's just a warning, isn't it? That Iran could go that way, couldn't it? Could be bomb flat like Gaza, could be. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. We're bringing back both speakers now. Jerry's got his hand up, but it's a bit late now. I'm afraid we're already running over. Moshe, do you want to come in first?
Very briefly, I don't recognize this kind of Marxism that takes no interest and takes no position in a war unless it's a class war. I don't think Marx would have recognized this position. There is such a thing as the colonial war, and the situation in the Middle East, including the Israeli attack on Iran, is within the context of the war of colonization, in which Israel is the colonizing state. If you take a symmetric attitude to both sides, the colonizer and the colonizer, then if it were Marxism, I would not want any part of this Marxism because it is an immoral position. Simply crassly immoral. But it isn't a Marxist position, and it isn't something that Marx would have recognized. Thank you very much.
Well done, Moshe. Yasmin.
Just very briefly again on Paul. Paul, I think that this disintegration of states in the Middle East is part of US policy. That's what they did in Libya. I think Mike is right. It's the era of destruction. Alain Badiou calls it the scorched earth policy. In the 1940s, in the 1950s, US was developing capitalism because there was interest in exploiting the working class of those countries. In our time, it's destruction, scorched earth. Look at Libya. And I think that is a realistic possibility for Iran. Partly because there is no alternative, the existing. I mean, I didn't know Laura Kuenssberg was stupid enough to invite Reza Pahlavi. The guy doesn't even want to go back to Iran. He's said it time and time again. He says, I have a good life in US, why would I go? So this is all, if you like, imaginary by various people. We have not supported the Iranian government. Both Moshe and I were in the leadership of Hands Off People of Iran. We maintained throughout its post-period an opposition to the Islamic Republic. I've spent most of my life fighting the Islamic Republic. So this is just ridiculous stuff to accuse us of supporting Iran. All I said was this attack was on Iran, on the rest of Iran and on the Iranian people, not just the government. The government is responsible for where we are. The government is responsible for corruption, for the economic hardships that has created these situations that Mossad can infiltrate sections of the working class as well as ordinary people, right? But we have no illusions about the Islamic Republic. When someone like John talks about democracy, you obviously haven't fought working class struggles under a dictatorship, under repression. Otherwise, you wouldn't make the stupid comments that democracy doesn't matter. Every time the working class fights in Iran, it gets shot at. So having democracy is not an illusion, isn't some silly midterm slogan. It's because it's a reality. You need that in order to fight the working class struggles. Your crass Marxism, as Moshe was talking about, it's just silly. You need that to fight work class struggles. Class struggles don't happen in the cloud, don't happen on IT clouds. They don't happen in the sky. They happen on the factory floor where you need to survive first, to live against a dictatorship. You need to fight with guns very often to survive. And so, yes, you do need that kind of democracy. We do want to remain on the slogans of blaming the Islamic Republic, calling for more rights. The worker struggles will be the first victim of this war. Facts are the first victim, but the working class struggles. Throughout last week, I was following the strikes in various places, including Asaluye and Tractor Soji in Tabriz, where the Israeli bombs have landed. Do you think that has helped the class struggle? No. But we have to, obviously, none of us have given up on class struggle in Iran. All we are saying is the US wants revenge against the Iranian people. And that revenge against the Iranian people for daring to throw away the 1979 puppet regime of the Shah is not something simple. And so it's Israel, US are not just going to give up, even if they overthrow the Islamic Republic, in the same way that they wouldn't give up when they defeat Hamas. They are after destroying anyone who opposes the US's power, the US's control of the region, and Israel is doing the work for it. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you. Very last comments. There are some scenarios that are being discussed, and one of those, and probably one of the worst ones, is that there is a possibility that the IDF will kill Khamenei. And given the intelligence they have, given the drones they have, that is a possibility. And of course, that will change the scenario a bit further, because then you are in a more chaotic system. Under such circumstances, I would argue that we could have a scenario of even more extremist fundamentalists coming to power in Iran under the leadership of the Revolutionary Guard, at least temporarily as an interim. And that would be a terrible situation as well. So that's all I have to say. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thank you. And some comrades might benefit from reading this book if you don't know about Marx's really how important he took the battle for democracy and how important that was in his writings and his activities. It's a very interesting book that explains it. Comrades, June the 21st, Palestine demonstration. It will be a rather big one, also focusing on Israel and Iran. So it would be good if comrades could come along. Send us an email, office@cpgb.org.uk, and we'll send you details. Thank you very much, Moshe. Thank you very much, Yasmin. As Mike put it in the chat, Mike Belbin, is a good discussion, slogans versus analysis. and I think we had a good discussion on the analysis of the big picture, what's going on, and how do we oppose it. Thank you very much, comrades. We see you next